My name is Michael Guyette, publisher of The Lead Lag Report. Joining me for the hour is the man known as Zuby, who's an independent rapper, author, podcast host, a modern-day Renaissance man. Zuby, I've been listening to some of your prior podcasts. I'm excited for this conversation here. For those who are not familiar with you, introduce yourself. Who are you? What's some of the kind of key aspects of your background, and what are you doing in terms of your own brand building?
Yeah, sure thing. So my name is Zuby. I'm an independent rapper, author, host of the Real Talk with Zubi podcast, international public speaker, and I also do social media, fitness, and life coaching. So I've kind of got five, I've got at least 5 jobs. Realistically, it's probably more like 12. I started out, my music career started back in 2006 in the UK. I am British, but I was born in England, raised in Saudi Arabia, family background from Nigeria, and I've been in both the British and American school systems. I'm a graduate of Oxford University. That's where I first started my music career independently. I've put out 9 albums and EPs to date and sold tens of thousands of albums and tens of thousands of books as well at this stage independently. And I am a truth seeker and true speaker. People who know me for a lot of different things, whether it's for my creative endeavors or for my public social and cultural commentary, either here on Twitter or across a lot of different podcasts, on stages, whatever it may be. I don't care what people initially discovered me through, but I'm happy that they've discovered me and care about the message I have and what I have to say in the world.
Let's talk about the importance of perspective for a bit. I mean, you've traveled the world. As you mentioned, from England to Saudi Arabia, you have exposure to a lot of different cultures. Do you think that gives you a real edge in terms of communicating and understanding things differently than most people that are just kind of getting things from social media and traditional media?
Yeah, absolutely, it does. I mean, from a very young age, I've been surrounded by a very broad, like truly diverse range of people and also different cultures. So, coming from a Nigerian background, that gives a certain perspective. Being from a Western country, being born in the UK and spending, a decade or two of my life in the UK primarily comes with a certain perspective. Living in a country like Saudi Arabia I lived in Saudi Arabia for 20 years. I went to boarding school in the UK and university in the UK back and forth. I left the American school system in Saudi Arabia after 5th grade. So I've experienced, both my upbringing was, very heavily influenced by the USA in my childhood years. Even though I was in Saudi Arabia, a lot of my teachers at school were American. A lot of my friends were American and Canadian, but also from all over the world. And then, these days I spend far more time in the US than I even do in the UK. And on top of that, I've been to, I think, 38 different countries at this point. I'll hit 40 this year. So it certainly creates a lot of perspective because I don't come from a default sort of position on anything. Like my worldview is not like a typical British worldview or a typical American worldview, or it's not a typical anything. I can relate to an extraordinarily broad range of different types of people, regardless of their background, their class, their race, ethnicity, faith, political beliefs and systems, whatever it is. Like I've seen and experienced a lot of different aspects of that. So, for example, a country like Saudi Arabia, it's a country that a lot of people have very strong feelings of, despite the fact that 99.9% of people have never even stepped foot in the country. But having lived there for 20 years, it gives me a certain perspective that I can speak from in terms of being able to understand everything from their laws to their culture and society and traditions and the way they do things and why it's different to how things are in the West. It gives me a nuanced view into the differences between the UK and USA. The USA is not just a big version of the UK, and the UK is not just a small version of the US. They have certain overlaps and similarities, but there's some, very big and significant differences between these nations and the cultures that a lot of people don't understand because they're just kind of coming from a certain perspective. And that's not any kind of diss. Like that's just the norm. The way I grew up was not normal. It was atypical. It's not normal to grow up across a range of different countries and to be surrounded by so many different types of people in so many places. But I think that's one reason why I'm able to speak about certain things in a certain way and why people find it interesting and captivating because they know that they're going to get a different perspective than they may get from the sort of majority view.
So I'm by ethnicity Egyptian myself. I was born in the U.S. My parents from Cairo and Alexandria, Coptic Christian, came to the U.S. And so I kind of saw both sides of the Middle Eastern culture, and then of course, being American myself, I'm curious, given how long you've lived in Saudi Arabia, what are some of the things that you think people get wrong in the view of the country, of the culture, of the mentality? Listen, I remember very vividly as the drums were beating for war with Iraq and Afghanistan. My parents kept on saying to me as a young kid, the West, the Americans, they don't understand the culture. They don't understand what they're getting involved with in these kind of wars. What is it that's unique about the culture versus the West?
Wow. Well, I think a good way to, first of all, understand different countries and perhaps different cultures is, first of all, to understand that the value system and the value hierarchy and what different societies and nations prioritize is not the same everywhere. So, take for example the USA. More than almost than pretty much any country in the world, if we were to sort of collectively say, okay, what is the sort of top, at least in theory, what's the sort of top value of a country like the USA? What is the thing that they're trying to maximize? And I think for the USA, the answer would be liberty, right? Freedom, individual liberty and rights. That's what the USA is all about. Americans love to talk about liberty and freedom, liberty, freedom, individual rights. Like that's the priority. That's not the top priority in China. That's not the top priority in Saudi Arabia. That's not the top priority, perhaps in Japan. That's not the top priority in every single country. But when people are raised in a certain nation and society, they sort of take that lens and they often project it onto everywhere else and therefore judge them based off of, assuming that they have the same sort of value hierarchy and are aiming and orienting their nation towards the exact same thing. And if you do that, you're always going to misunderstand a place because not everywhere someone could you could make a good argument that perhaps someone may think that individual liberty should be the top priority in every single country. Someone is very welcome to believe that, but billions of people around the world would not agree with you, right? Other places may think that. So, for example, China, and I haven't been to China myself, but if I look at that nation, it seems it's a more collectivist mentality. It seems like the thing that's takes a greater priority is some sort of concept of a type of collective good, right? A sort of, the greater good. I don't like that term at all. And this is not my personal worldview. But if you're going to understand that country and its laws and the way things are done in a certain way, you'd have to understand that. Again, I haven't been to Japan, but from what I know of people who have traveled there and people I've met and so on, it seems like the sort of concept of honor and respect for other people and fitting in rather than standing out too much. These are things that they prioritize much more greatly, right? There could be something that's promoted in the USA and would be greatly frowned upon somewhere like Japan. And similarly, when in Saudi Arabia, you have to understand that it's a 99% Islamic country, right? This is the country of Mecca and Medina. This is where Muslims go on their pilgrimage. You can't untie the country from the religious faith because the religious faith informs what they're orienting themselves towards. It informs the laws, it informs the customs and the traditions and the way that people go about their daily life. The everything from the way that people dress to their day-to-day behavior to, like I said, the laws and everything. So if you can it can be a tricky concept to get your head around, if especially if you haven't traveled internationally very much. But I think if you understand that, then whether or not you agree with various things, you can at least have a better understanding of why it's like that, right? You can understand that, okay, the goal isn't just like, hey, we're just trying to oppress people or we're trying to be mean or we're trying to be, it's like that's such a shallow and dumb view of trying to understand other places. That's not what it is. And so I think that with a nation like Saudi, or I think another mistake people make with a lot of the Middle Eastern countries is they sort of conflate them all. They sort of think that Saudi Arabia and Iran and Syria and Afghanistan and Dubai are all the same place, and they're not. These are these are different places with very, very different situations. Everything from economic to legal to cultural. They're not all the same place. But I think sadly, a lot of Westerners, not all, of course not, but a lot of Westerners, a lot of Americans in particular, might just, think of the Middle East as this sort of homogenous bloc, which it's not. Just like the West isn't, sometimes, yeah, we speak about the West as a bit of a homogenous bloc, but it's not, right? All Western countries have their differences, and they have their cultural, legal, and social differences. And yeah, it's important to understand that. I'm a big advocate for travel because I think that traveling gives you wider perspective, and with perspective also comes gratitude. I think a lot of the reason why we're having a lot of the problems we are in the Anglosphere in the modern West is because people lack gratitude and lack perspective. So they don't actually understand how good they have certain things. And when you don't understand how good you have certain things, you're more likely to undermine or destroy them even. And I'm seeing a lot of that going on. Most of the threats seem to be domestic and internal in terms of the sort of undoing of certain important elements of our society. And yeah, the world has a lot to see anyway, so traveling it's fun anyway, but it does offer a great perspective, and there's no shortcut for experience. You can't just bypass it. It's great to read books and to listen to people, but experiencing something is always it's always different.
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit I've traveled myself to 47 states, and you always hear that line in the media. There's two Americas. There's many more than two, right? If you just actually
Mhm.
go outside your state borders.
Yeah, sure thing. So I think, look, as we know, sadly, in in some of our countries, in the USA, in the UK, in Canada, elsewhere. But I'd say, in the USA in particular, especially, in terms of the data, the familial breakdown and the breakdown of marriages and the sort of normalization of no fault divorce and all of these things has been it's people want to be honest, it's been a catastrophe for our countries over the past few decades. You don't need to go back particularly far to find out where when it was just a lot more stable. I mean, right, just one lifetime ago, for all the flaws that existed in society, say prior to the 1960s, and there were a lot of flaws, right? We've come a long way in many regards, but I think that one thing which has definitely gotten worse and has gone backwards, and which is having very serious repercussions, everything from the impact on children to the economy to people's mental and physical well-being to rates of criminality and so on, it's the breakdown of family. And there are certainly many, many nations and parts of the world which have held on to they just have much tighter families. The concept, this perhaps is also one of the downsides of this hyper individualistic mentality that exists in the USA, because everything can become about individual rights and what I want and my happiness and me, 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 me. It can be this very sort of myopic and solipsistic worldview for certain people. And with that comes this idea that whatever, it reduces the concept of duty. It minimizes the concept of honor. It just becomes, well, I have a right to do this, so I'm going to do it. And, if you judge me, you're a bad person. And, there's nuance to these things, but I think we'd be lying to ourselves if we were pretending that a lot of the issues that we are currently seeing socially and culturally are not the fallout of this whole type of mentality. And there are millions of people who are not, their mindset is not like this, and they're holding it down, and they're doing what they should be doing and acting with honor and with duty and so on. But I think that one thing that perhaps the modern Western world could learn from it, either it's the older version of itself or from other countries that may not be as economically developed or progressed as much in certain ways, is the importance of the family unit. I think the family unit is the building block of society more than the individual unit is. And individual rights are extraordinarily important, and I will always fight for those and advocate for them. However, with every right comes a responsibility. And I think that the responsibility part often gets forgotten, or people act like it doesn't exist. And then people want to then, get triggered by me even saying this and, say that I'm some type of evil person because I'm connecting these dots and drawing patterns because no one wants to be implicated in anything. And no one, people don't want to take responsibility and recognize, okay, maybe we need to look inwards a little bit and not just be freaking out about China or Russia or the Middle East or whatever, and get our own nation in order, get our own society in order. So that's my honest perspective on that.
I think there's also an inverse correlation between the breakdown of family and the rise of the personalities like an Andrew Tate, like a Jordan Peterson, right? That people
Mhm.
need to latch onto because they don't have the father figures of old because of that dynamic. I'm curious to hear your thoughts um, on the rise of sort of these, modern day, what they want to call them, philosophers or aggravators, right? Depending on who you're asking. Yeah, personally, I think it's interesting to see that there's this almost alternative narrative that's being pushed out by personalities like that, which rubs a lot of people the wrong way, and a lot of the things are extreme. You can argue, but there is a kernel of truth in what they're trying to put out there.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, the USA, as far as I know, someone can fact check me on this, but I believe that the USA has the highest rate of children growing up with single mothers. It has the lowest rate of fatherhood presence, I believe, in the world, if not just in the West. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. We live in an age where saying that boys and girls need fathers is considered controversial, right? There's people who get mad at me when I say that it's ideal for a child to have a mother and a father, right? How is that controversial? This is common sense. It's not by accident, whether you are religious or not. It's not accident. It's not an accident that it takes a man and a woman to even create a child, right? You're ideally supposed to have both. I understand there are all sorts of different sorts of situations which makes that where that doesn't happen, right? There can be mistakes made. People can get sick and die. People can become widows. There's all sorts of reasons why not everyone will reach or achieve this sort of ideal or standard. But to pretend that because something is difficult or not always possible, that the standard must not exist and that everything is just equal and whatever, we don't need dads, what, it's devastating. I mean, as a especially if as a young man grows up, as a boy grows into a teenager and a young man, he is going to look for male role models, period, always. There's no, and any man in this conversation, you know damn well that as a young man, as a teenager, you look for and look up to various types of male role models. Now, ideally, that should be your father should be number one. That is the ideal. If there's any fathers on this chat, I can, and you have sons or you even have daughters, you're going to be their number one first place that they look to for a male role model. And if for whatever reason that father is not there, then this is where uncles and grandfathers and other people can fill in a role. But this is also where celebrities or social media stars or YouTubers or whatever can, fill this role. And you're not going to just have one male role model. My dad is my top one, as he should be. But, I have multiple role models. But I think that as this rise of both confusion and fatherlessness increases, it doesn't surprise me that you're going to get public figures coming to prominence, whether this is in the form of a Joe Rogan or an Andrew Tate or a Jordan Peterson, who might sound all like very, very different people, but there's a certain through line in all of their messaging and in all of their personalities and all of their rises to prominence, especially over the past decade. Maybe I'm even in this to some degree because I know that there are people who look up to me. Um, and so, I don't think it's a surprise. I don't think it's shocking. It totally makes sense to me. I think you combine this with a culture where, we're supposed to believe in a lot of lies and there's a lot of nonsense going on out there. And also where boys and men have kind of been browbeaten for multiple decades in the modern Western world, right? You've got all these notions of toxic masculinity, or men not being important or not being wanted, or just kind of being expendable. I think a mistake that has been made, I don't know if it's a mistake, perhaps it's intentional, but I think that with a lot of the messaging, in the goal, in the effort to uplift girls and women, I think that men have sort of been put to the side, if not put down in some regard. There's this mentality that in order to lift up one group of people, you need to put another group down, which is complete BS. It's completely wrong. It's the same way how, there's this demonization of white people. Oh, we need to uplift black people, so let's demonize and hate on white people. Like, it's all whack. It's all lame. You don't need to put down men in order to lift up women. You don't need to put down women in order to lift up men. You don't need to put down white people in order to lift up black people or ethnic minorities. Whatever the situation, right? It's win-win. We're all human beings. And so I think that because of a lot of that messaging and programming, which has been amplified by both traditional and social media, there are a lot of people, I'm talking millions of young people out there, both men and women, or boys and girls, who are looking for role models and guidance and influences in all sorts of places. And some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them are a combination of positive and negative. And that's just where we are. And the technology simply just makes it even more confusing and complicated. And it's also new. This whole combination of smartphones and social media. We've had this for fewer than 20 years. And it's such a groundbreaking technological innovation. It's amazing in so many ways that this conversation is even possible. And you guys can all hear me. I mean, that's witchcraft as far as my ancestors would be concerned. It's truly amazing. But with it, you can also, there's the addiction, there's the potential for destruction, and there's all the mental health and other fallout that can come with that.
Right. And the reality is that negativity often gets the most engagement. I mean, you're going to get the most likes and retweets if you say something tearing somebody else down as opposed to providing a positive message, which is really irritating for me as somebody who's trying to build a business and come across hopefully thoughtfully with the type of work that I do. But it just creates an environment in general where it polarizes the world even more, and the algorithms are pushing that out because that's what gets people on the apps, that's what gets the ad revenue, and that's what creates the divisions across every single culture.
Yeah, it does. And I'll tell you what, let me give people some optimism here. I do think that is changing. I think I posted about this a couple days ago. I do think that, people are seeing through the matrix, and I think a lot of people are getting tired of the hyper partisan, what I call kind of like red meat politics, just being hyper reactionary and just low IQ and low resolution takes on everything that are just, super, let's just go all the way here, or let's just go all the way there. And, if it comes from that side, then we support it. And if it comes from this side, we oppose it, no matter what it is, no nuance. I think that people are growing exhausted of that, and people are starting to kind of see through it more. We're not totally there yet, but I think that there's a lot of room for people who do have more nuance and are willing to have these difficult conversations and aren't just, on a quote unquote team, ride or die. um, and so I see that. I see it with my own audience. How do I even have 1 million followers on this app, and almost 2 million across the different ones, right? I think people are looking for those voices of, okay, who's actually really thinking and trying to be, honest, and trying to have conversations and really trying to make sense of the world. And it's not about having all the answers. We don't have all the answers, but you can grow a giant audience and gain a massive amount of respect from asking questions and being intellectually curious. I think that Joe Rogan is the most, probably the best and biggest example of this. I mean, Joe Rogan is he's a comedian. He's an MMA commentator who started a podcast, I don't know, 12 years ago, just to, have some fun with his friends. But he doesn't have all the answers to everything, but he's having all these conversations with thousands of different people and being open and being honest, whether you agree, you disagree, trying to understand why people think the way they do and hold the beliefs that they have and all of that. And it's important, and it lets you recognize that, people are human, whether you, however much you agree or you disagree or why. I think if people can at least have these conversations and understand where people are coming from, across all these different potential boundaries and tribes that we could have as human beings, then that's how we ultimately develop understanding and empathy and all that. So I think that I think we're slowly creating a sort of more sane middle of people who are, critical thinkers. I don't know. People who are listening to this conversation right now, people who are critical thinkers, and yeah, maybe they lean this way on that issue and lean this way on that issue, but they're trying to better themselves. They're trying to understand the world. They're not just trying to start fights and edge people towards some type of civil war or anything like that. And I think at the same time, the authorities, the legacy media, the politicians, all of these big entities, they're people are losing trust and faith in them, and rightfully so, because they're just lying to people and gaslighting and creating false narratives and lying to people every single day. You can't lie to people every single day nonstop and expect all of them to continue to trust you. That's just not how it works. So I think there's a lot of room now. Like I said, yeah, good faith discussions, critical thinkers, people who are willing to talk, people who are willing to listen, people who have some courage. And I think that the more people do that, the more it encourages other people to do so, which is part of why I think it's important for me to, say what's on my mind in these type of situations, because I know that it encourages other people implicitly and explicitly to do the same in whatever degree they can. Yeah, it's a big question, man. I think that there have certainly been, I don't think I know, there have been certain agendas and narratives and policies pushed which create what I would call perverse incentives, right? Where you're incentivizing bad behavior and you're disincentivizing good and stable behavior. We've seen that in various ways. And then, of course, you've also got the power of the media, which is it still is influential. Music and movies and TV shows, social media, all that stuff. It still influences the way that people think, and it helps to shape society and culture for the better or for worse, which is why people care about it. It's why people care about what's going on in the world of music. And people do care if you've got a Grammys performance and you're putting up stuff that's really not safe for work, or the children shouldn't be watching, or whatever. That's why people care, because they understand it has an impact on society and on culture. And then I think in terms of the interference, you touched on the censorship. Of course, that's also been an issue, because when there is censorship, it prevents these types of discussions from happening in the way that they're supposed to. It makes it harder for what I call sense making to take place. In order to make sense and to try to find the truth, you need to be able to talk. You need to be able to have questions. You can't be totally isolated. You need to constantly be engaged in order to get closer to the truth. So when you have massive censorship and you just say, okay, this is the one opinion that is allowed, or that these are the things you cannot even question, then it has a multiple fold effect. Number one, it prevents that sense making, as I said. But number two, it has a chilling effect, right? It scares people. Scares people. People don't want to speak up because now they're afraid of being canceled. They're now afraid of losing their Twitter account. They're afraid of losing their YouTube account, their Facebook. They're afraid of becoming unbanked from their bank. They're afraid of losing their job. They're afraid, so many people are just operating, whether or not they realize it, from a sort of state of constant fear. And when you're operating from a state of constant fear, then it's harder to operate from a place of, whether it's reason or love or critical thinking or some type of combination. If people are just scared all the time, and that fear is being directed at whoever they've been psyoped into being told is, quote unquote, their opposition or their enemy, then it results in a lot of the nonsense that we see constantly. I mean, a perfect example was just what happened during the whole C-19 scamdemic situation, right? If people had been allowed to meet up with each other and have conversations, and there wasn't all this censorship and, oh, that's misinformation, that's disinformation, all these people getting banned for, questioning masks or questioning the efficacy or safety of a shot in the arm or questioning the lockdown policies and, all that stuff. I think the whole situation would have looked very different if it were not for the censorship. I don't think we would have been caught in this 2 to 3 year sort of warp of just the inversion of everything and all the problems that have come from that. But this environment of hyper intolerance and fear and paranoia was just created to the point where people were afraid to say that water is wet. And when that happens, we've seen this play out multiple times in history, and it's a very strange thing to live through. I think we've actually just lived through a very historic time that hopefully will not be repeated. But I hope that people have taken some lessons from it, because it did get very gnarly.
When you were saying that whole point about water is wet, so I was fine trying to look for the tweet I shared in the nest, and this is something that's a personal belief for me. This is whatever, almost a year ago. I put out this message saying nothing is has meaning if the meaning of words can be changed. I mean, part of division is not just censorship; it's the confusion of what the definition of different terms actually is, right? Because what ends up happening is everybody then starts interpreting things through their myopic way of looking at the world, and you can't even get to a point of debating something if you can't even agree on what words mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if you're not even that's part of it. And then also, if you're not even allowed to, quote unquote, allowed to discuss certain things or to challenge certain ideas or to question things. I mean, good ideas don't rely on censorship. I don't. I'm so anti-censorship. I think if an idea is good and if something works, then there's arguments for it, and the proof is often in the pudding. It's bad ideas that need censorship. If you're lying, if you're putting out bad ideas, if you're saying stuff that doesn't make sense, then the greatest weapon in your arsenal is censorship of everyone who would question or challenge you, right? This is why the quote unquote experts, these government or public health experts or whatever, right? They're all full of BS, because if I claim to be an expert in a subject, right? I've written a book on fitness, Strong Advisor. I wrote a book on fitness and nutrition and taking care of your body. Okay, so if I say, okay, I understand this topic better than 99% of the population, I'm an expert in this subject, right? I've been doing this for 20 years. I consider myself an expert, right? And then someone asks me a question about macros or about meal frequency or about how to do a bench press or whatever. And I want to I'm like, hey, you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to ask me that question. Like I'm trying to censor people. It's like, look, if you're an expert, you should be able to answer. You should be able to answer the questions. You should be okay with being challenged. You should know that what you're saying is going to hold up at least to some basic level of scrutiny. And if it doesn't, and you're not even willing to have those conversations or debates, I mean, did anyone debate Fauci? I mean, did any of these public health officials? Why weren't these guys going on Joe Rogan and getting grilled, or going on any of these other podcasts? No, because they're full of BS, right? If you actually can, if you actually are saying the truth and are able to back up what you're saying, then you shouldn't be, I don't know, you don't have to go to all these social media platforms and get them to act as censors on your behalf and prevent, get rid of anyone who's asking an inconvenient question, or anyone who's, got a counter narrative or a different experience. You want to label it misinformation or disinformation and, pull people off this. It's really not the way forward. I would also say it's actually, coming back to what we were talking about at the beginning, it's also really sort of it's very anti-Western. It's a very illiberal concept. One of the things that has made, the Western countries so successful in terms of both economics and certain areas of society and culture is the fact that people do have freedom of speech, and people do have freedom of association, and you're able to sort of talk and be creative and agree and disagree and find consensus or not all of that stuff. And so when you start to put all these clamps on it under the guise of, health and safety, or trying to stop misinformation, or trying to stop conspiracy theories or whatever, oftentimes the difference between the conspiracy theorists and everyone else is that the conspiracy theorists are just, 6 to 12 months ahead, and that they have the facts earlier, right? And so even when someone is wrong, like, people are allowed to be wrong. Being wrong is how we learn, right? That's not spreading. If someone says something that they believe to be true, and it turns out that it's incorrect, then that's not them, spreading misinformation or disinformation necessarily. That's just, oh, okay, they got it wrong. Um, and so it takes a level of humility, and I would respect everybody, but especially these public officials and people. If people were just able to say, you know what, like, we made a mistake, right? Go back to February 2020, and there's this, and people think, oh my gosh, like, I mean, look, even with C-19, if I remember correctly, at the beginning, there were people thought that the death rate of the disease was like up to 5 to 10%. They were saying that 5 to 6 million Americans were gonna die, and potentially 100 million plus people worldwide, and this and this, and it affects them. And then within a couple months, it's like, oh, okay, these are not the statistics, this is not the data. Okay, it doesn't impact children and teenagers and healthy young people in the way that we thought it did. But there was just no course correction. It's just like, nope, we started this way. Let's just keep going, keep going, keep going. And it went on for literally years, right? It's still going on to some degree. They still haven't even finished with all this nonsense in certain places. And it's like, it's just an extraordinary lack of humility and an unwillingness to just say, okay, I made a mistake. It's like, if you're driving to a destination, and I don't know, you read your GPS or you read your map wrong, and you're heading east when you should be heading west. I mean, it's a smart thing to just keep on driving east and getting further and further and further from your destination. No, the thing is to have humility and go, oh, whoops, I made a wrong turn. Let me turn around and let me go back in the correct direction. And it would be so foolhardy and ridiculous for to imagine having someone sitting there, or your GPS telling you, hey, you're going in the wrong direction, and you just keep on going and going. So, oh, well, I'm already going this way, so let me just keep on going. And yeah, I wish people would stop doing that. Wow, I think I need to write an entire book on this topic. My next one is certainly going to touch on it, but that's a fantastic question. It's a huge question, so let me do my best. Um, with that said, that's actually part of it, right? Just doing your best. With everything I say, a lot of my tweets and statements are constant reminders to myself, right? These are not just messages for other people, but to do your best, right? Do your best. Where none of us are ever going to be perfect in any regard, but we can certainly always strive to do better in terms of our behavior and in terms of everything that we're doing, mentally, physically, emotionally, our career, our finances, our relationships, whatever. I think doing genuinely trying to do your best every single day, every hour of the day, is important. I think that another part is to recognize that this goes for almost everything. Typically, what people fear in their head and conjure up in their imaginations tends to be far worse than the reality. You see this in so many different areas. So, for example, the majority of adults have something called glossophobia. Glossophobia is the fear of public speaking. Now, why would most people be afraid of public speaking? They're not afraid of speaking because we all speak every day. What they're afraid of is social judgment. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing. They're afraid of upsetting someone. They're afraid of people misunderstanding them. If you're in person, they're afraid of, I don't know, looking stupid in front of an audience or in front of people you like, or whatever it is. That's why most people are afraid of public speaking. So next to death, people are primarily afraid of social judgment, and that serves a purpose. But oftentimes it's massively overblown, right? If there's a young single man and he sees an attractive woman out and about who he wants to initiate a conversation with, in his brain he's thinking of the worst possible. He's thinking of like some ridiculous thing that may happen. Oh my gosh, what if she slaps me? What if she like attacks me and insults me? Whatever he's conjuring up in his brain is probably 50, 100 times worse than the reality of what'll happen, right? In best case, oh, actually, maybe she's very open to it. In the worst case, maybe she says, "Oh no, I'm not interested," or "I have a boyfriend," or "I'm busy," whatever. It's not the end of the world. So I think when it comes to speaking up, people often conjure up in their head like, I don't know, you're going to get canceled and you're going to lose your job and you're going to not be allowed to do this and this and this. The truth is, normally, yeah, sure, there might be some pushback, especially initially. Um, but unless you're doing something that's like fully crazy or saying something that's like totally radical and truly objectionable, um, number one, most people don't care. Most people are very occupied in their own heads and in their own minds. They're not walking around like worrying about everyone else beyond a reasonable degree. So I think a lot of these sort of limiting beliefs and limitations, these are things that we kind of place on ourselves mentally. I've often said that, nobody can impress you in the same way that you can impress yourself. And I really believe that to be true, especially in this modern era. Like, we're living in the freest time ever, regardless of who you are or your immutable characteristics or whatever it is. There's no one, people are not running around out there trying to, people don't even care about you enough to oppress you. And I don't even mean that in the negative way. I just mean that we're rather insular. Like, as I'm walking around my day-to-day life, I'm thinking of what I need to be doing in my life and this and this. I'm not like walking past everyone in the street and obsessing over them, let alone trying to prevent them from, impede their success or get in their way or anything. So I think people need to get out of their own way to a large degree. And I think also people need to think about when it comes to certain things, I think people also need to consider the consequences of not doing what they know that they should do, whether that's in their action or whether that's speaking up or whatever. There's not really a neutral in this situation. People might think that staying silent and keeping your head down is neutral, and it's not. It's kind of like an implicit agreement for whatever is going on. And this, you have to pick your battles. You don't want to be out and about fighting every day and getting in conflict every day. But sometimes you do have to speak up, and if you don't, then you have to live with the consequences of not doing so. So I'd say whether you do what you know, whether you do or say what you know that you should, or you don't, there's always going to be consequences. There's not a neutral. And I think if people can understand that, then maybe that also will, kind of spur, nudge people in a better direction. And the very last thing I'll say is also that these things are habitual. Cowardice and courage are not simply traits; they're also habits. If you default to typically taking the easy route and never asserting yourself and never saying what you believe and always self-censoring or whatever, then it becomes very easy to do that all the time, and it becomes harder and harder to speak up when you need to. Whereas if you default to a more courageous position and you do default towards doing and saying what you believe is correct and moral and ethical and whatever it is, then it actually becomes pretty easy. You don't need to jack yourself up. You don't need to get hyped up and motivated. It's just how you operate day to day. So I think, yeah, hopefully that's some type of answer to that.
I want to focus on the grind it takes to do what you do, to have multiple interests, and to be out there as much as you are. I try to be so in a different way. Um, I've heard you talk about how you were literally just, on the street selling CDs like every single day, just grinding, trying to get people to pay attention to your music. What did you learn from that experience? And, given the success you've had, is that something you'd still keep doing?
Man, I learned a lot from selling my CDs out there on the street. So, um, in person, IRL, as we say on the internet, I have met well over 500,000 people. And, I sold tens of thousands of CDs in the UK before 99% of people who have now heard of me had heard about me. And man, I could write a whole book on the things that I've learned from it. But you learn, some of the key ones are, just what you learn about other people, first of all. Um, a lot of people are afraid of talking to strangers, but if you talk to strangers for a living, then you realize that, firstly, people are more similar than they are different. For all the differences that we often focus on, most people are pretty similar and have quite similar sort of goals and beliefs. Most people they want to be healthy, they want to be happy, they want their life to have meaning and purpose. They want to have friendships, they want to have intimate relationships. Most people want to have a family. Everybody is, technically part of a family. People need to make money. They want to have their jobs. They want to be able to pay their bills and whatever it is, like whatever country you're in, whoever you're meeting, whatever their political views, whatever. These are things that, most people have in common. And most people are also decent. And when I say decent, I don't mean, I wouldn't, that's why I don't even say good, but most people are at least trying to be good, right? Most people are trying to be decent. Some people, do it much better than others, but even people who are not great at it, even still, sometimes they're decent. And then you also just learn from the personal perspective. You learn resilience. You learn to develop a tough skin and not to take everything personally because you're dealing with so much. You're constantly getting ignored. You're having to deal with rejection. Sometimes people are impolite or say something that's not nice or do something that's not nice. And you learn to not to take everything personally. But I'll tell you, one of the things that was always funny is, when I'd go out there for years on end and I'd just be selling my music and my merchandise either on the street or at my pop-up shops that I used to run in different shopping malls, is at the end of every day, I always remembered how many CDs I'd sold, how much money I'd made, and the positive interactions. Like those negative ones, even though at the time it can be hurtful or it can make you feel a certain type of way, actually you kind of forget it, right? You remember the success. I remember, oh cool, like I sold 50 albums today, right? That's a successful day. I'm not thinking, oh, uh 300 people said no. 300 people said no or ignored me. I'm like, that's deleted from my brain by the end of the day. And you also remember that, each day you kind of have to start again. It's there's no, you have to perform consistently, and you have to just grind. And sometimes even what you're doing at the moment, you don't see where it's leading. You don't necessarily see the success. It's the same. It's like if you start a diet or you start going to the gym and you're trying to go from unhealthy to healthy, or you're trying to go from fat to fit or skinny to jacked or whatever, you know, doing one gym session and eating one healthy meal, you're not gonna like, yeah, you'll feel a little different, but you're not gonna see immediate differences. But if you go to the gym and you take care of your diet, and you do that consistently, after 6 months, you look back, it's like, whoa, okay, I've made progress. You look back after 6 years or 16 years, and it's phenomenal. So you don't really notice the kind of day-to-day micro changes. The same thing can happen in a career. When I was out there, I didn't really see, I knew in the big picture, okay, I'm going to have some success and I'm going to achieve and impact millions of people eventually. But when you're out there on the street in the cold or in the rain or whatever, and you're just being ignored, and you're sort of standing there, you questioning why the heck you're putting yourself through such a thing. Um, you always have to kind of trust the process and keep the faith. And the same goes for every single endeavor. Unless you're very fortunate in certain ways, we typically start from zero in whatever it is. We all started with zero Twitter followers. If you start a YouTube channel, you're starting with zero. If you start a business, you're probably starting with zero customers. You're always starting from zero, but that doesn't mean that you stay there. If you want to learn a new language, you want to learn how to play a guitar, whatever, you're going to start from zero. You're going to be bad at it to begin with, and not a lot of people are going to care, and people aren't going to pay attention. But you got to show up day in, day out. You've got to learn to love the process even when it sucks. And over time, if you work hard at something and you're genuinely good at it, then the world will it'll eventually reward you, and people will start to pay attention.
Yeah, it's like the story of the way bamboo trees grow, right? So you keep watering the seed, you keep watering the seed, you don't see anything sprout, and then suddenly overnight it goes up like 3 feet, right? So you don't know exactly when. It's hard to model out, but you got to keep on doing that, and then hopefully it kind of pays off. That old expression of it takes 20 years to become an overnight success. That's the grind,
Yeah.
right? That's required.
Thanks, Sega. Thank you for the kind words. I genuinely appreciate that. I mean, look, I've had people have tried to cancel me probably hundreds of times at this point. I haven't experienced anything, sort of involving the let's say the authorities, or having the whole big tech or traditional media mobilize against me or anything like that. I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm very prepared for it to happen at some point if my not if when my audience and reach and influence gets to a certain stage. I think it's sort of bound to happen. But on a lower level, I mean, I've had the quote unquote the Twitter mob multiple different Twitter mobs coming to me many times. I've had people try to get me kicked off of this very platform and others, whether that's mass reporting or, people spreading lies about you, all that kind of stuff. Um, and it sucks. It's lame. I think it's sad. That's what I think a lot of stuff is, honestly. I think a lot of stuff is kind of sad because I know what my message is. I know it's positive. I know what's in my heart. I know the sort of value and message it is I'm trying to bring to the world. And also just because I think it's a shame that there are so many people out there, and oftentimes men, if I'm being honest. I think it's a shame there's so many men out there who are so, I don't know, angry at the world or resentful or envious or jealous or whatever, that they just want to spend so much time trying to tear down other people and other people's accomplishments. I mean, that's really not how I'm wired. Like, I will be critical of things I think are bad or unnecessarily elite divisive ideas, but I'm careful to always be, as gentle as I can be with other human beings and with other people. I'm careful to not just use my platform to just like randomly attack people or whatever it is, because it's like, look, I'm on my game. I'm a builder. I'm creative. I'm building. I'm working. I'm doing music. I'm doing podcasts. I'm trying to grow my platforms. I'm making videos. I'm doing live events. I'm very focused on trying to create and build and uplift and inspire. I don't even have the time, let alone the inclination, to be trying to just tear down another man or some woman's accomplishments, especially if they're doing something that is genuinely helping and inspiring people. To me, that's just crazy. Especially with we live in this time where there are some real bad guys out there. There are some real people who are actually been been oppressing us and been dividing us and being doing all this. And so I find it strange when why how is Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan the person that you people have been led to think is the enemy, and that's the person you're going to spend your time attacking? Of all the people in the world, like, Jordan Peterson is the person you want to spend attacking, the guy telling people to clean their room and to take personal responsibility and inspiring so many people. And it's not about whether or not you totally like or resonate with an individual, but I can see when someone is having a positive impact on others. And the last thing I would want to do is, go tear that person down. So, yeah, that's been my experience so far. I have had to be resilient and deal with a lot of nonsense. I'm sure there's people taking shots at me right now, this very moment. It never stops. I've had people taking shots at me nonstop for the last many years. But as I said before, you can't take it all too personally, and you just have to kind of manage it and not get sucked up into the whole matrix and stay grounded.
Last question on my end, and then we'll wrap up here. Because I think this is, for me, sort of an interesting transition challenge. I think you've probably already done this yourself, Zuby. But there comes a point where, as you're building your own brand, you can't be the only person building your brand. In other words, you got to have a team behind you. Um, I'm curious, how do you? I have to assume, right? There's other people behind, who you are that
Nope.
think similarly,
Nope.
right?
Nope.
No,
It's
not at
just
all.
me.
That's all you.
It's all me.
I guess that's the grind. It goes. So no, because I'm not, and I say it because I'm kind of in that situation myself, right? It's like I have a certain mindset, mentality. I have a certain brand that's attached to my own name that I built over the several years. I'm a fund manager. I'm a musician, also. Much less success than you, but But the point is, like, at some point, you gotta think about, do you want to keep on doing that grind and focus more on bigger things? I don't know what the right answer is in terms of if that's even doable.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, the people want to connect with people, not with the brand, but the person is the brand, right? So it's just an interesting dynamic, I think.
Yeah, I hear you. I think that there's certain things that obviously can be outsourced, right? So, for example, I don't do my own, podcast editing anymore, right? I've got someone who can help me with that, or who can help me with scheduling certain things. So I think from a sort of business perspective, there are certain things that you can kind of outsource. But I think in terms of, you as an individual, the personal brand term is a little bit weird to me, but you as an individual, like, I would never let anyone else tweet for me, for example. Right. Like, no, like, that's got to come from me. That's coming direct from my brain. No one is doing that for me. But then there's things that are just kind of more like technical audio editing, video editing, scheduling stuff. Like, that those are the type of things that can be you can outsource. But I think also people think they need a quote unquote team far earlier than they really do, and I think oftentimes it's because they kind of want a little shortcut. And the amount that you can do by yourself, do not underestimate that. Do not underestimate it. I mean, I find it I find it actually a massive compliment that people assume I have like a massive team or something, because I don't. I've kind of just done all this by myself, but people don't even kind of recognize that that is possible. But it really is, and maybe it wasn't before, but in this day and age, you can build a platform of millions of people. You can build a 6, 7, 8 figure business. Maybe not eight by yourself might be a little tricky, but you can achieve massive amounts of success, without having a whole sort of team and operation and needing to outsource a ton of stuff. It's definitely possible.
Well, thankfully, I have some editors for the podcast I'm going to be doing that I'm going to be putting up with this. So I'm with you
Yeah,
on that.
exactly.
No. Yeah, no, listen, everybody here, I appreciate those that were engaging. Sorry for those that wanted to come up and ask questions. I do have to hop. I'm actually doing another call in parallel to this. Multitasking is a big thing. I'm sure you know that feeling, Zuby. Everybody, please make sure you follow Zuby, check out his podcast, check out his music, support people that provide positive messages like him. I'm doing several more spaces today, including a very special one. I'm talking about cannabis reform at 9 p.m. with a man that many would consider the most powerful person now when it comes to cannabis reform in the U.S. Stay tuned, folks. Thank you, Zuby. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys. God bless.
Cheers.